Hey everyone, Mr. Kuespert here. Just wanting to talk to you today a little bit about the French and Indian War. And one thing to point out is that the French and Indian War was not a war of the French versus the Indians. It was a war of the French and Indians together against the British. Now, there were some Indians that did join the side of the British, but the vast majority of them joined the French. There's a reason why. If you look at this map here, you can see the French territory and the British territory. And the French, when they claimed their territory, known as New France farther north and Louisiana farther south, that whole long strip of land had been claimed by the French, but they had a very good relationship with the Native Americans, did a lot of trading for furs and other things with them, and had really grown to have a good, prosperous relationship between each other. The two groups got a lot of benefits from that kind of relationship, whereas the British, more often than not, just took areas over, claimed it for themselves with complete disregard for the Native Americans and anything they wanted. Well, things came to a head when British farmers and colonial farmers continued to move further and further west as more and more people came to the colonies, and they wanted to settle farmland, which they had heard was very rich in the Ohio River Valley. So they crossed over the Appalachian Mountains. The French would claim illegally. The colonists, including mainly the Virginians, said that's our land, so that's where we're going to go. And that's when a whole disagreement started. Well, the French started to harass these British farmers who were going into the French territory, and it was up to a 21-year-old young guy by the name of George Washington to go in there and tell the French, hey, leave our guys alone. Well, the French pretty much had nothing good to say and basically completely disregarded Washington as well. And Washington tried to set up a fort in the area known as Fort Necessity, about 50 miles from the French fort of Duquesne, which we'll get to in a little bit. But he set up this really kind of piece of junk little fort, and it was so easily able to take over. A lot of historians kind of joke and say the only people that liked it were Washington and the second little pig, because it pretty much was just easily blown over by the French or the big bad wolf, depending on the situation. So, at any rate, the bottom line is that the French army basically captured Washington and his troops. They were let go on the notion that they would go back to the British territory and they would tell the British authorities, hey, look, the British are not welcome in the French territory. They're not welcome in the Ohio River Valley. That land is for the French only. And that's got the ball rolling towards conflict. Well, with war being imminent, both sides knew they better start to get their stuff together if there's going to be a throwdown right in the backyard of the 13 colonies. And certainly one side were the colonies themselves. They decided, hey, it's probably would be a good idea, some colonial leaders thought it would be a good idea, for the colonists to join forces together and raise an army, a militia, to join with the British in their fight against the French. Sounds like a great idea because, hey, it's being fought in our backyard. It's our mother country fighting. We shouldn't expect our mother country to do all the fighting for us. We should be involved in that conflict as well. Benjamin Franklin was one of the leaders who proposed this. In fact, in his newspaper, the Philadelphia Gazette, he posted this picture here of a snake chopped into lots of little bits, each of the bits representing a colony, and he's basically saying, hey, look, we better join together or die. If we don't join forces and help the British, the chances of the French defeating the British and, of course, in addition, us, are very good. So we need to jump in and help them out. Now, Ben Franklin's plan called for all 13 colonies to pool their money resources together. Basically, they'd all pay some taxes, and those taxes collected would go towards paying for the soldiers as well as equipping them, giving them guns and all that stuff, all their boots and whatnot. But in the end, when they took a vote, 0 colonies approved it. Not one single colony approved it. In fact, they all said, "Oh, we don't like the idea of these 13 colonies, doing this, banding this stuff together. I don't. If I'm from New Hampshire, I don't want my tax money going to pay for soldiers from Virginia or to put boots on someone from Georgia." And it became really a selfish thing. And Franklin was pretty upset about it. He said, everyone cries that union is necessary, but essentially everyone behaves like they have weak noodles when time comes for action, essentially saying that, you got weak minds because you don't use your brain to think about those things. Well, essentially what happened is the colonists did not support the British, and the British would remember that. We'll get back to that later, certainly when we get to Section 2. But basically what happened was the British government went in and started to push into the Ohio Valley, and they sent a guy by the name of Edward Braddock to go in. He was a general, and he was going to go in and capture Fort Duquesne, and his force was basically really huge. And he was going to also have the services of George Washington as well, although that was a minor detail for the British government. But the whole thing turned out to be a calamity because Braddock just completely ignored any kind of advice he received from the colonists. He said, I'm a British general. I don't need to listen to these colonists. They don't know anything. One of the warnings was, hey, look, you fight in the style of open fields like they do in Europe. You fight in the style of soldiers standing side to side, rows and columns. And you can't do that here in America. A lot of the areas that you're going to be fighting in are going to be densely forested, as you can see here, hills and forests, and that's not really the makeup of most of the European areas where you had been fighting. And not only that, but Ben Franklin himself said, look, you better watch out because you're going to be ambushed. These guys don't typically fight in rows and columns, and the Native Americans certainly don't fight that way, and so if you take them with a grain of salt, you're going to get yours. And sure enough, Braddock went in with his force, and they were routed, and Braddock basically himself was killed, as half his men would be killed or wounded. And so that became a major, major loss. Now, the British would also suffer more losses, just like the Detroit Tigers lost the 2012 World Series in 4 games. They lost several battles. The British also lost several battles. They would be basically routed by a guy by the name of Montcalm. He was a general for the French. He captured him at Fort Oswego as well as Fort William Henry. And so right now it appears as though the French are winning this thing big. As you know, when a professional sports team realizes that they're not really going in the right direction, they usually make a change at the coaching staff first. And when Great Britain got a new prime minister by the name of William Pitt, he did exactly that. He started to clean house and retire a bunch of old generals and put a bunch of new generals in, most of them very young. In fact, one guy was 30 years old by the name of James Wolfe, and General Wolfe became one of Pitt's top men. Well, with all these new generals in hand, Pitt decided if they're going to win the French and Indian War, they need to go on offense. Despite the fact they'd lost several key battles to France already, they decided if they go on offense, they might be able to pull some things off, and sure enough, they did. They won a major battle at Louisburg, and then shortly thereafter, they decided to go and attack that key fort at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, which of course form the Ohio River, and that would be Fort Duquesne. And the British would attack and defeat the French at Fort Duquesne. They would rename it something British in honor of their prime minister, so they called it Fort Pitt. And of course today, the rest is history. The Three Rivers City, as it's known, became known as Pittsburgh thereafter, and still to this day. Several more victories led the British towards the north, and they were then going to attack the capital of New France at Quebec City. Quebec, which was led by, the French, which was led by General Montcalm, were now going to have their number one general go against the British number one general, General Wolfe, in this deciding factor. So essentially whoever wins this big key battle is going to win the whole thing. And the British did attack. They had some of the army climb up the steep cliffs outside the city, and some went down and kind of attacked the French from behind the lines by cover of nightfall. And essentially the French were then squashed by their own the fact they could not get out from where they were up on these cliffs, and the British were able to defeat the French. Unfortunately, though, even though it was a British win, both Generals Wolfe and Montcalm lost their lives at the Battle of Quebec. Well, a little while later, the British defeated Montreal, another major French city, and that ended essentially the battles at the French and Indian War. It'd be a couple years later before they'd finally sign a peace treaty. That peace treaty would be known as the Treaty of Paris. And essentially what happened was the French decided we got to get out of the North America business. Now, very late in the game, in the war, Spain pledged their support for the French. And so they had actually fought on the side of the French for a very short time until the British actually won anyway. And so Britain said, look, Spain, you're going to have to give up something. So they gave up Florida. In addition, the French, they gave up everything. They decided we're out of here. They gave up all of Canada, all their Canadian possessions. They gave up all of Louisiana, which is everything from the Mississippi River east to Britain. So now Britain owns everything to the east, with the exception of New Orleans, which the French then, because they felt bad that Spain lost Florida, French gave New Orleans to Spain, and also all of their possessions west of the Mississippi to Spain. So now essentially North America is a two-horse town. Essentially, we've got the Spanish west of the Mississippi, we've got the British east of the Mississippi, and the French are totally out of the North America business after the French and Indian War. So, to recap, the French and Indian War was the French and Indians against the British, and in the end, the British won, and the result was Britain got all of the territory east of the Mississippi, which is what the United States would eventually look like once they would gain their independence from Britain, which we'll be getting to very shortly. So that's all for now. Take care.